The stale, recycled air of the throne room tasted of metal and old fear. Elara kept her eyes fixed on the worn toes of her leather slippers, her whole being focused on a single, desperate prayer: be invisible, be invisible, be invisible. Here, in the heart of the obsidian citadel, invisibility was the only armor a human servant possessed. Especially now. King Cailan was on his throne, a sculpture of lethal grace carved from shadow and fury, and the tension crackling from the dais was thick enough to choke on. Two of his highest-ranking vassals, Lord Valerus and Baron Corvin, were locked in a bitter territorial dispute, their posturing filling the cavernous hall with the low growl of vampiric displeasure. Elara's task was simple, yet it felt like walking a razor's edge over a canyon. Refill the ceremonial goblets. Do not spill a drop. Do not make a sound. Do not draw a single glance. Her hands, already slick with nervous sweat, tightened on the heavy silver tray. The ruby-dark wine sloshed, a miniature tide of blood against polished metal. She took a breath, the scent of dust, cold stone, and the cloying, sweet perfume of the vampire elite filling her lungs. It was the scent of power, of predation, and it made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. She moved with a practiced meekness she had perfected over 6 years of servitude, a ghost in a drab brown tunic. She refilled Baron Corvin's goblet first, her movements fluid and silent. He didn't so much as twitch. Next was Lord Valerus, whose cold eyes flickered towards her for a fraction of a second, a dismissal so profound it was its own kind of violence. She flinched internally, her shoulders hunching further. Finally, there was only one left. The king's. His goblet sat untouched on a small table beside the massive, throne-like chair of carved obsidian. Cailan hadn't moved, his attention fully on his bickering lords. Your claim is based on a pact 3 centuries old, Valerus. The king's voice was a low rumble, a sound that vibrated in Elara's bones. A pact made with a bloodline Corvin's ancestors eradicated. The pact died with them. Elara approached the dais, each step a careful negotiation with the floor. The air grew colder, charged with the sheer force of his presence. He was ancient, powerful beyond comprehension, and the aura of absolute authority that clung to him was a physical weight. She reached for the goblet, her fingers trembling as she wrapped them around the cool stem. As she leaned forward, tilting the pitcher, a stray lock of her unremarkable brown hair fell from its pin, brushing against her cheek. And the world stopped. King Cailan froze mid-sentence. His head, which had been angled towards Lord Valerus, snapped in her direction with preternatural speed. The rumbling discourse cut off into a silence so absolute it was deafening. Every vampire in the room, from the mighty lords to the guards lining the walls, went utterly still, their attention dragged to the source of their king's sudden, shocking focus. On her. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced the fragile shell of Elara's composure. No, no, not me. Please, not me. Her prayer had failed. She was seen. She was the center of every predatory gaze in the most dangerous room in the world. The king's eyes, moments before a cool, intelligent silver, were now fathomless black pools of undiluted shock. His nostrils flared, and he inhaled, a deep, shuddering breath that wasn't for air. It was for scent. Her scent. A low sound, a guttural growl of disbelief and something far more primal, tore from his throat. Elara's blood turned to ice. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that was surely audible in the terrifying silence. Out, Cailan breathed, the word a blade of sound. No one moved, stunned into paralysis. His voice erupted, a command laced with the ancient power that bent wills and broke spines. Leave. Now? The effect was instantaneous. It was a physical force, a wave of compulsion that sent lords, guards, and attendants scrambling for the exits. There was no dignity in their retreat, only the instinctual flight of lesser predators from an apex. Lord Valerus and Baron Corvin, who had stood like titans moments before, nearly trampled each other in their haste. The massive doors to the throne room slammed shut, the boom echoing in the sudden, vast emptiness. And then there were two. Elara stood frozen, the silver pitcher still clutched in her hand, wine dripping onto the polished floor like beads of blood. She was alone with the vampire king, and he was staring at her, as if she were the sun and the abyss all at once. The air thickened, heavy with a tension so profound she could taste it, ozone and something ancient, something hungry. He rose from his throne, not with the measured grace of a king, but with the fluid, stalking motion of a panther. Each step he took down the obsidian stairs was silent, yet it resonated through the soles of her feet, a drumbeat of approaching fate. She wanted to run, to scream, to dissolve into the shadows she had called home for so long. But her legs were stone, her throat a knot of pure terror. The scars on her left wrist, usually hidden by the long sleeve of her tunic, began to burn with memory. She knew this kind of focus. She knew the look of a predator that had found its prey. Her past was a roaring beast in her ears, drowning out the present. He stopped 10 feet away, his body coiled tight, a study in controlled violence. His fists were clenched at his sides, his jaw a hard line. He was fighting himself, and it was a terrifying battle to witness. "Your name," he commanded. The words were rough, scraped from a raw throat. "Elara," she stammered, the sound a pathetic whisper. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if her name were a blow. "Elara," he repeated, tasting the word. When his eyes opened, the black had receded slightly, leaving a storm of silver confusion. "Your scent. It is not possible." She didn't understand. She smelled of lye soap and fear. Nothing more. "My lord." "Blood rose," he murmured, his gaze distant, looking through her. "And winter frost. For 1,000 years, it has been a legend. A story told to royal children. The sanguis anima." The blood soul. He took another step closer, his focus zeroing in on her with an intensity that made her want to crawl out of her own skin. A mate for the king, forged by fate. A perfect match of blood and soul, meant to anchor his power. A myth. It was always a myth. Elara's mind reeled. A mate? Huh? A broken, scarred human servant. It was a mistake. It had to be. This was a death sentence. To be singled out by the king was to be painted a target for every ambitious, jealous creature in the citadel. Survival lay in being forgotten, not in being a fabled creature from a vampire fairy tale. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, the denial a reflexive shield. "You're wrong. I'm nobody. Just a servant." His eyes dropped from her face to her hands, to the sleeve of her tunic where it had ridden up her arm in her frozen stance. The faint, silvery tracery of old scars was visible against her skin. His expression shifted. The primal hunger was still there, but it was now overlaid with a cold, protective fury. The change was so swift, so complete, it stole her breath. "You are no longer a servant," he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "From this moment, you are under my personal protection. You will be moved to the royal wing. You will answer to no one but me." It was not a rescue. It felt like a cage. A gilded one, perhaps, but a cage all the same. He was claiming her, a possession he had just discovered. The terror that had been a cold knot in her stomach began to burn with a desperate, helpless anger. He hadn't asked. He had simply decided her fate. Again. Just like before. The chambers he gave her were larger than the entire servants' dormitory she had shared with 20 other women. Silken sheets covered a bed that could sleep four, and a private balcony overlooked the moon-drenched spires of the city below. Guards, the king's own elite shadow guard, were posted outside her door. She was a prisoner in a palace, and the loneliness was a physical ache. Her only visitor in the first 2 days was Anya, her friend from the kitchens, who snuck up with a tray of bread and cheese, her eyes wide with fear and awe. The whole citadel is buzzing, Anya whispered, twisting her apron in her hands. They are saying he's found his blood soul. Elara, Lady Vestra looks like she could kill you with a glare. Elara's stomach twisted. Lady Vestra. Beautiful, cruel, and ancient, Vestra had made it her life's ambition to become Kaelin's queen. She had always treated the human staff with a particular brand of contempt, and Elara had been on the receiving end of her casual cruelty more than once. She can join the queue, Elara muttered, pacing the room like a trapped animal. Anya, I'm so scared. He looks at me like he wants to devour me. And protect me. At the same time. It makes no sense. Be careful, Elle, Anya said, her voice dropping lower. Being nothing is safe. Being the king's everything. That's the most dangerous thing you can be. Anya was right. Later that night, Kaelin came. He didn't knock, the door simply opened and he was there, filling the space with his overwhelming presence. He had shed his formal royal attire for a simple black tunic and trousers, a costume of disarming simplicity that somehow made him seem even more dangerous. He carried a leather-bound book in one hand. I thought you might be bored, he said, his voice softer than it had been in the throne room. He placed the book on a table. It was a collection of human poetry. The gesture was so unexpectedly thoughtful it threw her off balance. She stayed by the balcony doors, keeping the length of the room between them. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice tight. I am trying to find that out, he admitted, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than absolute certainty in his eyes. It was frustration. This bond, it is not a gentle thing, Elara. It is a primal command in my blood. It screams at me to claim you, to bind you to my side, to eliminate any threat to you with extreme prejudice. So I am a thing, she shot back, her fear finally giving way to a spark of defiance. A craving you have to satisfy. A possession to be guarded. His eyes flashed. No. You are not a thing. He took a step forward, and she flinched back. He stopped immediately, a muscle working in his jaw. When I look at you, the instinct is there, yes. It is a storm. But beneath it, I see the weariness in your soul. I see a strength that has been forced to hide itself to survive. And it fills me with a rage I have not felt in centuries. A rage on your behalf. Who hurt you? The question was a physical blow. The memory of her captor, the rogue vampire Malek, flashed behind her eyes, his cruel smile, the feel of the branding iron against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, the sleeve covering her scars. You wouldn't understand. Try me, he said, his voice a low plea. But she couldn't. Trust was a currency she didn't have, a language she had forgotten how to speak. She shook her head, turning to face the cold night outside. Please, just leave me alone. She heard him hesitate, a war raging within him. Then, with a sigh that sounded like grinding stone, he turned and left. The book of poetry remained on the table, a silent, confusing testament to the man behind the monster. The attack came 2 nights later. Elara was asleep, lost in a dreamless void, when a crash from her sitting room jolted her awake. Her heart instantly began to pound. The shadow guard outside her door, where were they? A low, wet snarl echoed through the chambers, the sound of a beast barely clinging to reason. It was the sound of a fledgling, a newly turned vampire lost to the hunger. She scrambled from the bed, her mind racing. There was nowhere to run. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on a heavy, silver-backed mirror on her vanity. Without a second thought, she grabbed it, its weight a comfort in her hands. The door to her bedroom splintered inwards, and a vampire lunged into the room, its eyes glowing red with feral madness. It wasn't one of the court. It was a wraith, gaunt and crazed. Her survival instincts, honed in Malek's brutal war camp, took over. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. As the fledgling lunged, she sidestepped, bringing the heavy mirror down in a vicious arc against the side of its head. The creature roared in pain and fury, staggering back. It gave her a precious second. She darted past it, heading for the broken door to the hallway, to the guards, to safety. But the fledgling was fast. It caught her by the ankle, its grip like iron. She fell hard, her arm scraping against the splintered door frame, tearing open the skin. A sharp, burning pain flared, and the scent of her own blood filled the air. The vampire's head snapped towards the wound, its red eyes widening with rabid desire. It crawled towards her, drool dripping from its fangs. This was it. This was how she died. After everything she had survived, she would be torn apart by a mad dog in a pretty room. A roar of pure, unadulterated fury ripped through the citadel, a sound of such cataclysmic rage that the very stones seemed to tremble. It was Kaelin. The world became a blur of black. Kaelin was suddenly there, a whirlwind of motion between her and the fledgling. He didn't just fight the creature, he unmade it. There was a sickening crack of bone, a choked-off scream, and then a final, terrible silence. The king stood over the crumpled form of the fledgling, his chest heaving, his hands dripping with black vampire blood. Then he turned to her. His eyes, blazing with the aftermath of his rage, fell upon her bleeding arm. The fury vanished, replaced by a look of such raw horror and pain that it stunned her. He was at her side in an instant, his movements impossibly gentle, as he knelt beside her on the floor. "He hurt you," Kaelin whispered, his voice broken. He reached out a hand, his long fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the gash on her arm. He didn't touch her, as if afraid he might break her. In that moment, seeing the genuine anguish in his face, a tiny, fragile crack appeared in the wall around her heart. He wasn't angry at the breach in his security. He was devastated that she was hurt. As he carefully gathered her into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing, she didn't flinch. For the first time since she was a child, she felt the strange, alien sensation of being safe in someone's embrace. He carried her back to the bed, his rage simmering just beneath the surface, a protective furnace she was now standing inside. He dismissed the frantic royal physicians with a single, sharp command. "I will see to her," he returned with a basin of warm water and clean linens, his movements efficient and surprisingly gentle. The king of the vampires knelt beside her bed, and with an almost reverent touch, began to clean the wound on her arm. The intimacy of the act was staggering. His thumb brushed against the edge of her old scars, and he paused, his silver eyes lifting to meet hers. The question was there, unspoken but deafening. His name was Malek, she heard herself say, the words tasting like ash. He was the leader of a rogue clan. The Crimson Maw. They raided human villages for sport. And for stock. Her voice was flat, devoid of the emotion that still clawed at her insides. "I was 16. He liked to make art of his possessions," she gestured with her chin towards the silvery lines on her wrist. "He said permanence was a gift." Kaelin's face became a mask of stone, but a fire blazed deep in his eyes, a cold, white-hot inferno. He remembered the Crimson Maw. He had led the campaign that had wiped them from the face of the earth a decade ago, a brutal, bloody war to cleanse his borders of their poison. He had thought he was merely dispensing justice, upholding his laws. He never knew that in the heart of that carnage, he was saving her. "I killed him," Kaelin said, his voice a low, chilling promise fulfilled. "I tore his heart from his chest myself on the fields outside of Oakhaven." Elara stared at him. She had been one of dozens of human captives freed that day, lost in the chaos, eventually brought to the citadel with other refugees, and absorbed into the vast servant class. She never knew who her saviors were, only that one monster had been replaced by the shadow of a far greater, more terrifying power. A power that had just confessed to being her unwitting avenger. You will never be invisible again, Elara, he vowed, his gaze burning with a new kind of resolve. I swear it on my immortal life. I will find who sent that fledgling. I will burn their world to ash. He was true to his word. The investigation he launched was ruthless and swift. But something had changed in his approach to her. He no longer treated her like a fragile piece of glass. The day after the attack, he came to her chambers, a schematic of the royal wing spread on the table. The fledgling was smuggled through the old service tunnels, he explained, pointing to a route on the map. The guards at this post were found dead. It was a professional, targeted attack. Lady Vestra has access to these routes. He looked up from the map, his eyes meeting hers. She has been cruel to you in the past, has she not? Anya mentioned it. Tell me. He was asking. Not demanding. He was seeking her counsel, valuing her experience. He was giving her agency. It was a heady, terrifying feeling. She looks at me the way Malek looked at me, Elara said, her voice quiet but firm. Like I am an insect to be crushed for getting in her way. A grim nod. I thought as much. He then hesitated. There is more to the Sanguis Anima bond you should know. It is not about servitude. It is about balance. The power of my bloodline is immense, volatile. Without an anchor, it corrupts. It drives the king mad. It happened to my father. He became a tyrant, lost in paranoia and bloodlust. I had to end it. The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. This bond, Elara, it doesn't just make me want to protect you. I need you. Your soul is the counterweight to mine. Without you, I am destined to become the monster my father was. The revelation struck her dumb. He wasn't a master seeking a mate, he was a man walking a precipice, and she was his only hope of not falling. The power dynamic she had feared so much was not what it seemed. In his own way, he was as vulnerable to her as she was to him. The confrontation took place in the throne room, a perfect, chilling echo of their first encounter. Kaelin sat upon his obsidian throne, but this time, Elara was not cowering with a tray. She stood on the dais beside him, dressed in a simple, but elegant gown of deep emerald green. She felt the eyes of the entire court on her, but the fear was a distant hum, not a roaring inferno. Kaelin laid out the evidence against Lady Vestra with cold, irrefutable precision. The bribed quartermaster. The testimony of a servant who overheard her plotting. The trace of Vestra's unique scent on the slain guards' bodies. Cornered and exposed, Vestra's beautiful face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. She spat, her venom directed not at the king, but at Elara. You would choose this? This human filth? A scarred, used-up slave. She is nothing. She will weaken you, dilute your line. The court murmured, their ancient prejudices stirring. But before Kaelin could unleash his fury, Elara took a step forward. Her heart pounded, but her voice, when she spoke, was clear and carried through the hall. You are right, Lady Vestra, she said, her calm silencing the crowd. I am a human. I have scars. And I was a slave. She held up her left arm, pushing back the sleeve to reveal the marks for all to see. These are not marks of weakness. They are a testament that I survived you, and others like you. Your strength is in cruelty, in ambition, in tearing others down. My strength was forged in darkness. It is the strength to endure. To hope. To see the humanity in others, even in a king. She turned her gaze to Kaelin, and a silent understanding passed between them. Tell me, which strength do you think a kingdom needs more? A stunned silence fell over the court. Kaelin looked at her, his face filled with a pride so profound it was almost worship. She had not needed his protection. She had claimed her own power, right here, in front of them all. Vestra, utterly undone, let out a shriek of rage. She pulled a dark, jagged object from the folds of her dress. A shard of obsidian pulsing with forbidden blood magic. If I cannot have him, then his precious anchor will be shattered, she screamed, lunging towards Elara. Kaelin moved like lightning, a black shadow intent on interception. But something happened that no one, least of all Elara, expected. As Vestra's curse-laden weapon flew towards her, a brilliant, silver light erupted from Elara's chest. It wasn't a conscious act, it was instinct. A shield of pure energy, shimmering with the faint scent of winter frost, met the artifact mid-air. The dark magic dissolved against the light. The obsidian shard exploded into dust. Vestra was thrown back, her power broken. The Shadow Guard seized her. But all eyes were on Elara, who stood bathed in a soft, silvery luminescence that slowly faded. The Sangui's anima was not just a mate. It was a balance of power. His was the shadow, and hers, hidden until now, was the light. In the ringing silence that followed, with the entire court as his witness, King Kaelin descended from his throne. He walked to where Elara stood, her own heart thundering with the shock of her newfound ability, and he went down on one knee before her. The collective gasp of the court was a physical thing. A king knelt for no one. He took her hand, his touch reverent. He ignored the scars, pressing his lips to her knuckles. The bond is a choice, he said, his voice for her alone, yet it carried with the weight of a royal decree. It must be chosen. It is a joining of equals. A king and queen. A shadow and his light, he looked up at her, and all the power, all the authority, was gone from his face, replaced by a raw, beautiful vulnerability. I am already yours, Elara. By fate, by choice, by every measure of my soul. Will you be mine? Choose to stand by my side. Or choose to walk away, and I will spend my eternity ensuring your freedom and safety. The choice is yours. It will always be yours. She looked down at the king kneeling at her feet. The terrifying predator from her nightmares was gone. In his place was a man who had avenged her past, seen her strength, and was now offering her not a crown, but a partnership. He was offering her the one thing that had been stolen from her entire life, a choice. A slow smile touched her lips, the first genuine, unafraid smile she had felt in years. She reached out her free hand, her fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw. I choose you, Kaelin, she whispered. Months later, Elara stood on the high balcony of the royal spire, leaning back against Kaelin's chest. The night air was cool, and the lights of the sprawling city below glittered like a fallen constellation. She wore a gown the color of midnight, but her sleeves were short. She never covered her scars anymore. They were part of her story, a map of where she had been. Kaelin's arms were wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. The bond between them was a steady, warm hum beneath her skin, a constant presence that was no longer frightening, but the deepest comfort she had ever known. The trade delegation from the Southern Coven was impressed, Kaelin murmured into her hair. You have a better mind for diplomacy than any vampire I know. That's because I know how to listen, she teased, tilting her head back to look at him. His silver eyes were soft, filled with a love so deep it still sometimes stole her breath. A skill you are slowly acquiring. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through her. I have the best of teachers. He turned her in his arms to face him, his expression growing serious. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. My entire, long existence was a grayscale painting, Elara. A duty. A burden. A waiting. He leaned in, his lips brushing her temple, his scent, sandalwood and night air and the unique fragrance of him, a welcome embrace. My eternity didn't begin the night I was turned. It began the moment I caught the scent of blood rose and winter frost in my throne room. She closed her eyes, pressing her face into his chest, feeling the steady, unnaturally slow beat of his heart. She had spent so long being a ghost, a whisper in the corners of the world, praying for the safety of invisibility. But he had seen her. Not just the servant, not just the myth, not just the survivor. He had seen her. And in his eyes, she had finally seen herself. Not as a broken thing, but as a queen, whole and strong, sovereign of her own heart, and the chosen partner of a king who had learned that true power was not in commanding, but in kneeling.